Hello and welcome back to our Bag of Bones speedy, very fast bullet train ride through the Bible. And I promise you today's ride will be super, super fast because we have centuries to cover in the Old Testament. We last left off with getting to know the characters of King Saul and King David. And we learned that under the leadership of King David, with the blessing from the Lord, the kingdom was at its highest point it would ever reach. And it only went downhill from there. And to this day, the Jews are hoping to get the kingdom restored to the days that it was with David. Now, if we take Methuselah here, we know that in the last video we got somewhere to about here, the middle. Okay, today we are going to cover this whole section right here, all of this. We are going to do centuries and centuries real fast. So we ended up with the book of 1 and 2 Samuel, and now we're getting into the books of 1 and 2 Kings. And in it, we start with the reign of the new king called Solomon, David's son. Now, Solomon, as a young king, got in a dream. He heard from God, and God asked him, Solomon, I'll give you anything you want. What is it that you want? Solomon thought about it, and he said, Lord, if I need to govern and reign the people who you gave to me, I am going to need wisdom and discernment. Well, God liked that answer so much that he gave him the wisdom and discernment. But God said, I'll give you even more. I'll give you fame and I'll give you wealth and power. And God sure kept his promise because before long, Solomon was known all over for his wealth and wisdom. Very early on in his reign, he was called to make a judgment where he needed to use the wisdom that God gave him. There were two women that lived in the same house. Both of them had brand new babies. One of the babies died during the night. And now both women claimed that they were the mother of the living child. So they went to King Solomon, and in his wisdom, King Solomon said, bring me a sword, and we are going to cut the baby in half, and each one of you women will get one half of the living baby. One of the women said, no, 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 King, don't do that. Give the baby to her, to the other woman. It was then that Solomon knew who the real mother was. And this judgment was spread all over the kingdom. Everybody knew about the wisdom of King Solomon. One thing that King Solomon did that was not so wise is that he married the daughter of the Egyptian Pharaoh. And in God's law, it clearly says that you should not mingle with people who have foreign gods, but he did it anyhow. So here's this Egyptian wife, and he built a temple for her, or an Egyptian worship place. And that was the beginning of the many more mistakes that Solomon would make. During the reign of Solomon, there were no major wars. So Solomon could get active with peacetime activities. The first thing that he did was he built the temple for God. And it was magnificent, very time consuming, very labor intensive, but it was done. There were a lot of gold vessels, there was silver everywhere, copper, big pillars. It was a sight to see. In the meantime, Solomon got more than just one wife. By now he got about 60 wives. And then he fell in love with one woman in particular, and he wrote a song. And you can find that in the Bible. It's called the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs. Well, 61 wives was not enough, and more wives came. And it got to the point where King Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And a concubine is a woman with a lower rank than a wife. But anyhow, 1,000 women. Then he wrote the book of Proverbs. And in Proverbs, he writes, "Now, young men, be careful of the women," and among many other words of wisdom. When you read Psalms, it is almost like you're looking in the mirror and you see all your own faults. You read about laziness and slothfulness and using words wisely and being diligent, and all these character traits, they keep coming back in Proverbs. And Proverbs ends with a beautiful Proverbs about the perfect wife, and that is Proverbs chapter 31. Well, anyhow, the 700 wives and the 300 concubines was not enough for King Solomon. He started to get into philosophy and architecture and arts and music. He did all these things, and he collected chariots and uh, but all this also cost money. And if you remember back from the people wanting to have a king before they got King Saul, God said, "Watch out, kings come expensive." Well, this was the case with Solomon. He was expensive and he demanded a lot of labor. And the labor came primarily from the tribes in the north. And so there was a growing unrest in the north, while the south had all the luxury. So, with all these activities that Solomon did, he never really got satisfied with it. And then at the end, when he was an old man, he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, otherwise known as the preacher. And in Ecclesiastes, he wrote, "Vanity, vanity, all is vanity," otherwise known as pointless or useless. Everything is useless. And there is nothing new under the sun. And there is a time for killing and a time for living. You've probably heard these things before. Eventually, after 40 years of being king, Solomon, as they say in the Bible, Solomon slept with his fathers. His son Rehoboam took over. Now, the unhappiness of the tribes in the north led to the point that one man in the north by the name of Jeroboam went to the new king Rehoboam and said, "Hey, listen, under the reign of your father, he put a lot of burdens on us. Can you please lessen our burdens?" And Rehoboam stupidly listened to the counsel of his young friends, who said, "What? They ask to lessen your load? No, 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 make it even harder for them." So Rehoboam told Jeroboam, "We're not going to make it easier for you. We're going to increase the burden for you." And that led to civil war. And the land of Israel has never been the same. From this moment on, there has been a big dividing gap between north and south. So now Jeroboam was king in the north and Rehoboam king in the south. And what we see now in the Bible is in the book of 1 and 2 Kings, a long, long list of names of kings. Kings in the north, and typically it says, and this man was king in Israel and he reigned for 16 years, and he did evil what it was in the sight of the Lord. And then overlapping, this and this man was king in the south, and he reigned for so many years, and he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. And this list goes on for centuries. One king in the north was a particularly bad king by the name of Ahab. And Ahab had an even worse, a horrible woman as his wife called Jezebel. Jezebel was a worshiper of the false god Baal or Baal. And she had 400 priests of Baal, or Baal, sorry. And uh, at this time there was a prophet by the name of Elijah. And Elijah was sent by God to challenge the priests of Baal. And Elijah said, let's go to Mount Carmel. And you, priests of Baal, you build a temple and put a sacrifice. So you build an altar and you put a sacrifice on the altar, and I'll do the same. And then you pray that your God will burn your offering, and I'll do the same. And those priests, and there were more than 400 of them, they were calling for Baal, and they were calling Baal, 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 and he didn't listen. Of course not, because there was no such thing. And they kept yelling louder, and now Elijah started to mock them and said, oh, yell a little bit louder. Maybe he doesn't hear you, or maybe he went to the toilet. And they allowed it even more, and they started to cut themselves, but nothing happened. And then eventually Elijah said, put water on my offering. And they did. Put more water on it. And again, put more water on it. And by now there was so much water that there was a moat of water around the altar. Now Elijah prayed for God to bring fire down from heaven, and God did. And he consumed all the offerings, and he even lapped up the water that was in the moat. So all the people saw this, that the priests of Baal were not successful at all. And they said, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our God, he is the real God. Well, King Ahab was sent back by Elijah to go to his house before the rain started. And God had stopped the rain for 3 years, but now Elijah prayed, and all of a sudden the sky was dark and gray, and it started to pour rain. So Ahab went to his wife and told all that happened about all the priests of Baal that Elijah killed. So now Jezebel sent word that she was going to kill Elijah. And believe it or not, but Elijah got scared, and he ran, and he ran, and he ran. He killed all these prophets. He had this mighty, powerful demonstration of God's power, but he was afraid of one woman. And he ran, and he was exhausted, and he was woken up by an angel who said, wake up, Elijah, and here, eat something, because that angel had prepared food for him. Afterwards, Elijah kept going, and eventually he ended up at a cave where Elijah said to God, oh, I am all by myself. There's no one left but me. And God said, no, that's not true. I saved 7,000 people in Israel who do not bow down to Baal. Now get yourself together and get going again. So Elijah did. And eventually Elijah found a young man by the name of Elisha, and he became his disciple. And together Elijah and Elisha were known as true prophets from God, and the people feared Elijah and Elisha and had a lot of respect for them. Then there came a time that Elijah was taken up to heaven. He did not die, but he was actually lifted from the earth and was pulled up to heaven. And this is the second time in the Bible that we read about someone not dying but being taken up. The first one goes way, way, way back to the beginning with a man called Enoch. Enoch was also uh, pulled into heaven by God. So now Elisha took over the job of being the prophet for God. And there was one time when one of the neighboring countries, the king of Syria, had one of his most powerful generals who was very sick with leprosy. He sent word to Elisha, and Elisha gave that general the instruction to dip himself 7 times in the Jordan River. And reluctantly, this man did that, and to his amazement, he was healed of leprosy. On another account, Elijah um, resurrected through the power of God, of course, a young boy who died. Well, even a man of God like Elisha ended up getting sick and dying. In the meantime, there were these long lists of kings in the north and kings in the south kept going, and most of the time the kings in the north did evil in the sight of God, and the kings in the south, for the most time, did right in the sight of God, although never to the level of King David. Now, at this time in the Bible, after 1 and 2 Kings and Chronicles, you will see a whole lot of books by the prophets. There are a lot of prophets, and the prophets generally warned the people in Israel and Judea, listen, if you don't go back to worshiping God and stop worshiping false gods, you are going to be taken away into a foreign land. You will lose your country. And they didn't listen, and more prophets came and warned them. But the prophets also prophesied what would happen in the future. They prophesied about the coming of the Messiah. And the Messiah was also known as the deliverer. The people thought that this would be someone again like King David who would deliver them from their enemy armies. That was not the case. The Messiah, as we now know, is the Lord Jesus Christ. The Messiah is the one who would deliver them from their sins. And even during the days of Jesus, when he walked on earth, they didn't understand this. They kept on thinking about a military delivery from opposing armies. So the prophets warned the people, get back to God, and they prophesied about the future king to come. Eventually, all 10 tribes in the north were taken away by the armies of the Assyrians. One after one after one, the tribes were taken away. And now there were still people left in Judea, and actually they did pretty well. They did right in the sight of God, so God let them stay there for another 150 or so years. But still, they didn't live up to David. And the prophets, one of them was Isaiah, warned them again and again, if you do not go back to God, you will be taken up just like your brothers in the north were taken up. That'll happen to you too. And sure enough, eventually, there was a new king and country, the country of Babylon, and the king was Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar went to Jerusalem and started to take the people from Jerusalem out of there. He actually did that in 3 ways. The first wave with all the princes and the elite, the intellectuals. The next wave was all the craftsmen, the tradesmen, and finally the lower people. All that was left at this time were the poorest of the poor. So, all in all, now the entire country of Israel and Judea was emptied. There were no more Jews left. All of them were now in what we know as Babylon. And they had to stay there for the next 70 years, which we will cover in our next video. Now, if you look at this whole section that we just showed you in our little skeleton, that's a lot of years with a lot of books of the prophets. When you start reading the book of the prophets, be first to check out who the prophets are writing to. Was it before the exile into Babylon, or was it during the exile or after the exile? So you want to make sure that you read that in the right chronological order. And when you have a good study Bible, you can find this. So we just covered centuries and centuries, and we're going to pick it up next time uh, while they are actually in Babylon, and some incredible events happen there. So until next time, remember, faith comes by hearing, and hearing from the Word of God. Thank you.